What are some of the trends or challenges you see defining the global seafood market right now?
It's pretty simple, really. It's the trade war, the global trade war, which Donald Trump has kicked off.
But you guys thought that, okay, how can we build something that's adding additional value? So beyond the news content, Undercurrent today invested in building this pricing portal and data platform for the seafood industry.
We had the idea of doing it from the very start, and in fact, we did launch. I think we launched the portal in 2013. It had very few data sets on it. It's now got maybe like 3,500 plus. The way I see it is, if something helps our team write a better story in terms of understanding what's going on, it's also going to help our users. We bring them in with the news. And we then kind of upsell them to the data.
And subscription overall is today correct one of the bigger revenue sources?
Yeah, probably 70% plus, and it's going higher as well because our subscription revenue is really growing.
One thing I heard from B2B subscription is that churn is rather low. Is that also the case maybe for Undercurrent News, in this case, that you see this trend?
Yeah, definitely. I think our renewal rate is...
I guess you'd like to know what Undercurrent's news churn rate is. Well, you hear that number in this episode. But first, let me introduce you to today's guest, Tom Seaman, founder and editor-in-chief of Undercurrent News. We talk about how he built a niche media powerhouse in seafood, the bold shift in subscription strategy, and how they're adding real value beyond just content, with pricing data, trade insights, and tools that help their reader see the bigger picture. Stay tuned. So, Tom, one of my favorite songs in the techno world is from German Scooter, and the song goes, "How much is the fish?" And I think it's the perfect way to sort of start this. And right now, there's a lot of things happening in the seafood industry. What are some of the trends or challenges you see defining the global seafood market right now?
It's pretty simple, really. Well, I say simple, it's not simple, but it's the trade war. The global trade war, which Donald Trump has kicked off. That's pretty much taking all of our time. We're focused on covering the implications of that, both from like speaking to our sources, and then also using data to kind of look at the potential impacts on, because it's affecting all industries, but seafood is a very reliant on, it's a very globally traded product. And the US is a huge importer of seafood. So when something like this happens, it really kind of dominates the whole global agenda. So that's what all of our team are focused on. From the reporters in Asia to Europe to North America, we're all flat out on the trade war. So yeah.
And the seafood industry is what we're going to talk about. But more importantly, we are going to be talking about the newspaper that you represent, Undercurrent News. But who are you, Tom, and how do you get into journalism? And much more importantly, what led you into seafood and the industry?
Well, it was kind of a coincidence, really. I trained, I did a postgraduate journalism qualification in Cardiff in the UK. And as part of that, you had to do work experience, do lots of journalism qualifications. I did some work experience on a film magazine. And then also my uncle, who was in PR and shipping, he sorted me out with a work experience placement in B2B with a big company called Informa, which owns a bunch of shipping titles. It did at the time. I think Informa still owns Lloyd's List now, which was the kind of flagship shipping publication. So I got experience with B2B, and I realized that actually, I kind of wanted to be a film journalist or a music journalist. Very into film and music, and wanted to cover that. Realized that actually B2B is better paid. So if you wanted to move to London, you're much better off getting a job in B2B because it's a better salary. And two, just really interesting because you get to develop the knowledge of a niche that no one else is covering. So I started on this commercial fishing publication that Informa owned as a part, basically I got the job through a work experience placement, knew nothing about fishing. But they hired me because, I understood, I understood journalism. So, and then the travel really got me, my first 3 years, I'd been to South Korea, Japan, West Coast of the US, East Coast of the US, various places in Europe. And you often end up going to interesting places that are a bit off the beaten track, because it's a kind of, it's slightly niche industry. So that really, really got me into it. yeah, that's kind of that's what got me going. And then in 2012, we started Undercurrent News. Started it with a co-founder who I used to work with at a previous employer. She was very into the tech side of things, so she basically built the platform, and I brought the content. And that was well, 13 years ago now. 2012 we started it, and we've just been building the business ever since. So
It's
yeah,
quite it's quite 13 years is quite a bit. And I just have to
yeah,
say,
tell me about
also
it.
for the listeners also, so my background is always been in sort of working on the tech side of journalism, but I got to meet you, Tom, because I had sort of a little bit of a gap year in sort of the news industry where I worked with shrimps. And I absolutely, when you said how interesting going to go to the different places, like you said, Japan and other places, I got to go to Ecuador, I got to go to India, and man, the industry is super, super interesting. But talk to me a little bit when you got to start on the current news. Did you see there was a gap in the market for seafood, or what was sort of your vision when you started on the current news, and has it changed over years?
So we started it with the vision that I feel like we are now in the past couple of years starting to really kind of execute, which is that this kind of this data driven news basically was kind of the real thinking behind the starting of it. Um, so we felt that there was a space for another company to come in because there's a few other people covering it, covering the sector. Although I'd say it's hardly like saturated globally. And we felt that we had the industry knowledge to be able to add value with bringing in different sources of data, using our sources to collect different types of data. And we sort of when we started, we were collecting pricing around a few different data, specific data sets, which is a real point of difference that we've continued to this day, and we've just carried on building that up. So I feel like we always had. I don't think the sort of the mission and the kind of the vision of the company has really changed since the start. It's taken a while to get there because we've never taken on we've sort of self-financed the business basically, or from cash flow, from some early kind of friends and family loans, and then cash flow. So it takes a while to kind of but we I feel like we really are getting to a point now where we've got a lot of momentum, and it's almost like a kind of a 2.0 of the business now with this even greater push into data and pricing, which is kicking us onto a new level. It's very exciting. It feels like we're sort of a startup again, which
But
is fun.
but
Yeah.
but to ask you, like Tom, so the company was bootstrapped. Then you were getting into this. You had the experience from B2B and saw that, and then okay, there you saw there was players, but then there was a market opportunity. One thing is like convincing the people that started with you, but for yourself, how did you convince yourself that this is sort of a market I want to go for? What was your thought process going into that?
I felt that I felt well both me and my co-founder who's no longer involved in the business but was like we were he left the business in 2020. We both felt that the sector was kind of crying out for this kind of more data driven approach, and really kind of getting under the surface, digging in, like building this kind of going deeper was what we felt the sector needed. There was, to be honest, there wasn't really any. I really felt it was. I think we both felt it was going to work from the start. We felt not in a kind of an arrogant way, just in like we felt that we could do it. And it was one of those situations where I was 30 when it happened, didn't have any kids at the time. My wife was very supportive, and we weren't married at that point, but of the whole thing. And we both of us, I think, felt, my co-founder and I, it's just worth having a go. And what's the worst that can happen is it doesn't work out, and we go off and do something else. But I think we'd both reached a point with our previous employer where we wanted to do something else and move on. So it was like a catalyst for that. And ultimately, I guess it has worked out. So that was good. Yeah.
I love sort of the entrepreneurial spirit in terms of going after it. And we're going to be talking about niche publications today. And one of the things that got me interested into this conversation is that, of course, in Kilkaya, we work with different niche publications, and I see a quite big growth in that vertical compared to maybe traditional media. And one of the things that is important in the beginning is sort of to then understand the market size, and you talked about that. Um, but the thing is that having worked in the seafood industry and then also getting to just see it a little bit in the prep for this, the seafood sector is massively globally. But how is it in terms of Undercurrent news? Because do you go for like a vertical of like we're going to do farmed salmon, we're going to be doing mussels only? How do you sort of understand the potential of like different species, and how do you think about that in Undercurrent news?
We try and focus on the big issues, the big trade flows, the big species, which has kind of came from, when we started, we had a very small team. So you have to kind of go, what are the things that we can cover with the small team that are going to impact the most people in the sector? So, we focus on global shrimp sector, shrimp or prawns, depending on where you live, farmed and wild, salmon as well, farmed salmon, wild salmon, whitefish, shellfish, pelagics, um, and would that cover everything?
There's so many
But
species.
yeah,
That's the
we
catch.
the way we try and think about it is we want to on one hand, you could go. I think you could have a very successful news and data site just on shrimp, but there's also a value to being having the specialization within the kind of different pillars in the industry, but also being broad because yes, you do have lots of single species companies in the sector, but increasingly, you have like large kind of multi-species companies that want to know, the interconnectivity between, salmon in the US market and tilapia, say, or wild shrimp and farm shrimp, or lobster price. Like what happens with lobster if lobster pricing falls? Does that affect other categories? Or so I think it's we try and like have members of the team that are specialized in the different sectors, different sort of pillars in the industry, and kind of specialists in like say the Indian shrimp sector or Ecuadorian shrimp, or but then we're bringing it all together so that like a large company, say like Cook Aquaculture or something in North America, which is in lots of different species, or a big processor like Young Seafood in the UK. Um, they're buying lots of different species, so they can come to us and get this kind of one-stop shop, to use a bit of a cliche, of information across all the things that they're looking at. So I think it's we try and be like we're not a generalist, we are going in depth in each sector, but at the same time, I think it's worked for us to cover all of this because obviously a lot of the major companies want to know about all the different species. So that's kind of how we see it.
But how do you like from like being the editor in chief, and I'm thinking about what sort of scope you coverage in terms of balancing comprehensive versus being deep in one subsector? Do you have sort of like any data that guides you towards it? Is sort of like what's happening in industry and like like being close to it? Like how do you sort of determine what do we write comprehensive about versus what is maybe just going really, really deep?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Some of it is down to kind of gut feeling and industry knowledge, as to what, and listening to what sources are saying as well. Sometimes it's, our stories, all of our team have, very close relationships with their contacts in the industry. So we're listening to what the industry is talking about. We're listening to what, people sort of want us to cover, but on the other hand, we're then looking at web traffic as well. So like, if certain issues are obviously getting a lot of traction, we'll cover that. But I would say that web traffic isn't it's a in some ways when you've got a pay if you're like purely getting ad revenue off traffic, that's obviously your prime focus. But when you're serving a paying audience, you might write a story that gets 150 hits, but those 150 hits might be premium top level paying customers, and you might get a story that gets 20,000 hits, but it might be a kind of a frivolous kind of one about Red Lobster, or kind of like there's certain issues that if we publish like a short thing about, we know it's going to get a lot of reads, but that's not necessarily generating subscriptions and recurring revenue. So yeah, it's a mixture of some data, listening to the audience, listening to our kind of our contacts, and then also gut feeling of the team. And that's not only me as well. I mean, because I wouldn't pretend to know everything that's going on globally. I think we've got a very good team in Asia, Europe, and North America, and to an extent, they all have quite a bit of autonomy as to like we've set up the direction, and we've set that in place. But a lot of the time, they're covering things that it's not like I or the other editors are directing everything. Sometimes, the reporters are coming to us pitching ideas, pitching things that they think are worth covering. So it's sort of a balance.
And one of the things that you mentioned there is subscription, and B2B subscription, meaning having a subscription with, for example, companies in this case, where they buy a license, has been quite a big part of your business today. And subscription overall is today, correct, one of the bigger revenue sources.
Yeah, probably 70% plus, and it's going higher as well because our subscription revenue is really growing, whereas advertising revenue is stable, I would say. So yeah, subscriptions have been in the past, but we were at a point where advertising and subscriptions were kind of level. That was maybe 5-6 years ago, but since then it's maybe 70 to even 80% subs, possibly. Moving towards that, I would say.
And the niche publication always have had good models in terms of B2B subscription. But one of the things I think a lot of news publishers see is the growing trend. And there's a lot of benefits with B2B subscription. But just talk to me a little bit of how you guys work in terms of setting up, for example, an agreement with, you mentioned here, like exporters of fish or anybody who would be having interest for your product. How do you go about that in Undercurrent News today?
Well, it's a mixture of, we have an e-commerce element to our subscription where someone can come along and they can subscribe through the website. Maybe they see they see something they're interested in, they want to read it, they can subscribe. They can do that on a monthly basis, a rolling monthly basis, as in, they pay monthly and it continues until they cancel, or they can pay on an annual basis. So there is that, but that only gives you access to the news. You don't get any data with that. So the idea is we bring them in with the news. And we then kind of upsell them to the data. So they can also get in touch with us as well and get like a start discussion around purely a news subscription. But we used to have it so that you could also buy a premium subscription, as we called it, through the website as well. So you'd also be able to pay a set fee through the site and access the data too for one user. And then it would be like you got in touch if you were a large company and you wanted to do a deal where we gave you access for 20 members of the company, 30, 40, 50, whatever. That would be the negotiation. But what we've changed to now is only letting people buy the news subscription through the e-commerce, and then having all of the kind of data-driven sales negotiated with our sales team. And the pricing is no longer available on the website because we've introduced a bunch of like new things, which we felt it's just better to like have our own internal rate card, and we know what the price, and then we discuss that with customers, and reach an agreement based on, it's more about like getting them to having like a value-based process where the first call, you might not even be talking about the price of the product. It's about going through with them what we've got, and and then understanding also what they want. So like once you understand what their sort of their needs are, you can then tailor the offering subscription wise. Maybe they need the global pricing that we've got. Maybe they don't need that. Maybe they just need the US wholesale pricing. Maybe they need the trade portal. Maybe they need all three. It's kind of a discussion that the team have with the customer to kind of understand what they want to use the product for, basically, and how we could help them with that.
And but what was the pivot and sort of change here? Because I find this super interesting because it was done like coming to the paywall, buying it, getting access to the content. But then you guys, and we'll get into that, started building more offerings around what they could have. And is it that sort of you would need sort of like a direct sales then to them, sort of these are the different things that we offer that would be basically solving your challenge? You need that conversation in order to build up a complete offering. What I'm looking for is like, what was the pivot in strategy change going for that versus just keeping up with buying it on the
e-commerce business? I think the e-commerce business works really well for a purely news product. Because there's not much there's a little bit of a sales story around the news. You can talk about, the amount of stories you're publishing, the depth of, the depth you're going into, the team. We do talk about that as well, but it's a much more sort of, to some extent, it's a bit black and white. Whereas with the data, you need to have that discussion and articulate to the customer and explain to them and take them through it and, show them how to use the platform the trade platform we've got or the pricing platforms, and help them understand how they can use it to, to improve their business. I had a series of conversations around with various kind of people I met in the kind of price reporting space, and I realized that what we're doing is kind of a price reporting agency to some extent without ever having realized that we were necessarily doing that. So we started this development of building this kind of global price reporting agency, um, which is it's kind of a development of everything what we were doing when we started, because we started collecting pricing. And as part of that discussion, I then started to understand the commercial side of a lot of these PRAs, where they are not going to be going, our price is this on the website, or it's not how it works. You get those kind of higher ticket deals by having a strong product, and then being able to kind of discuss that and articulate that to the customers. But I think so. Various people said to me, you should take your e-commerce off completely and not have it at all. And we were at one point considering that, but felt it was a bit of a bridge too far. And we started this change to our sales model in January this year, and it's going really nicely, I'd say, so far.
This is one thing that I heard related to B2B subscription, which I've seen on different conferences being shared, is that if we look at individual subscription, churn is basically one of the bigger challenges, as a lot of news publishers have sort of grown with subscription and constantly having to sort of fight to keep that user building their habits and so on. One thing I heard from B2B subscription is that churn is rather low once you're having basically a deal with these companies. Is that also the case maybe for Undercurrent News, in this case, that you see this trend?
Yeah, definitely. I think our renewal rate is upward of 85%, probably. And no, the exact number off the top of my head. We've seen, because of what we've been doing in the past few months, we're seeing some, we've pushed up the price dramatically, and we're also, doing more kind of, negotiated deals. So when you do that, I think you see like some drop off of the very, very, very price conscious customers, that don't want to move from, I don't know, like $570 to $950. Ultimately, you just have to let those customers go and focus on the ones you can get the higher value from, because then you might get 200 to 1,000% uplift on large customers that understand the values. But overall, what I've seen so far from this change in the business we've made in the past this year is customers clearly really value what we do, because we're retaining customers even with a price increase. But I think a price increase, obviously people are increasing their pricing without even increasing the value of what they offer. But we have dramatically increased the value of what we offer in the past few years, and we've also underpriced ourselves as well, which I think is a weakness of most small businesses. Most small businesses undercharge, underprice themselves. They're nervous about moving up pricing, and that's where, say, like investors look at smaller businesses and often see a major opportunity, because they've got the courage to push up the price and charge what you should be charging. And we're trying to think like that, trying to kind of not sort of undersell ourselves, which we definitely had done in the first kind of stages of the business, I would say. Yeah.
Just to go in, I really want to dig in, because I find this really interesting, because it's not too far off like me working with sales in the software and being able to articulate the value you getting, dear Mr. Customer, in terms of having this software. So what sort of, have you made some learnings in terms of what's key to successfully selling this to the high value customers, subscriptions to companies in this space?
I think the change that we're making, we're really improving, is making sure that our salespeople really understand our product. I think previously they sort of, when it was a more news based with some data, there wasn't really a need to understand the product, because a lot of the discussions they would be having would be, right, do you want 10 users? Do you want 20 users? Right, 30, right, the discounts, this, whereas now they need to understand the product, because they need to have these, calls, where, demo calls with companies where they're articulating, what we're doing and explaining how to use it. I think that's kind of, I'd say, one change that we've made that has been successful. And I think it's then more, it's more of a stimulating and enjoyable job for the commercial team then, because it's very motivating to feel like you're an expert in this product which you're selling to people. You're not just kind of giving them a discount because they bought another 5 users or um, yeah, is that we as the editorial team are trying to work much more closely with the commercial team in terms of educating them again on what we've got. And in addition to that, we've done various kind of how to actually really cool like AI done videos where using a kind of avatar to sort of explain doing both. And these tools are great for explaining to your users on how to use the product, but also on your own team that have to sell it, because you can't really effectively sell something that you don't understand, can you? So yeah.
It's rather difficult to do it. So
Yeah.
being able to share also and upskill the sales team is crucial in it. And you touched on this, Tom, is that it's not just the content and then the articles on your side. I had to play around in this and saw your pricing portal that you built. That's also just more than price portals, but a lot of B2B news publishers today focus mainly on the content. But you guys thought that, okay, how can we build something that's adding additional value? So beyond the news content, Undercurrent today invested in building this pricing portal and data platform for the seafood industry. So where did this idea come from to develop this? And what have you seen sort of in how your subscribers, those using it, use it today?
We had the idea of doing it from the very start, and in fact, we did launch. I think we launched the portal in 2013. So like soon, the year after we actually launched the company, we started, but it had very few data sets on it. It's now got maybe like 3,000, 3,500 plus. So yeah, and the idea is that we've got these data platforms. So we've got pricing platform with global pricing data. We've got a platform which is just US wholesale pricing, which is a new thing that we launched late last year. And then we've also got, no, actually I think we launched it in February, actually. We started developing it late last year. And then we've got a trade platform as well. So there's these three kind of data products, and we've got more data products coming on that. And then we integrate that in, they exist as like platforms on the site, but they're also, then we integrate that into the news. So like, in an ideal world, we would do a story, where we're covering pricing. So we would then be talking about the pricing of the product in the story. We'd be inserting data, our own data, our own price assessments or data that we're pulling from various third-party sources, and then we'd also put trade data in. And the idea is that a sort of a new subscriber who doesn't have data access sees basically like upsell in the story, so they can read the story, but they see where there would be a chart that would help their understanding what's going on. They see a kind of upgrade opportunity there. So that's how we integrate the and then they can also, if you've got the top level of subscription, you can then go from that chart. You can go into the portal if you want to kind of compare different data sets, look for different things. So the portals are obviously kind of accessed directly, but they're also then integrated into the news. So the way I see it is, if something helps our team write a better story in terms of understanding what's going on, it's also going to help our users, because the users are basically doing a similar thing to the journalists. They're trying to understand what's going on in the sector. So yeah, we say the trade portal, we like the development of that took a very long time to develop. We were maybe developing that for 5 years. And it felt at certain points like, we should, stop developing the product, because we weren't getting the right data. We're struggling with, turning it into a usable product. And there's still, I think, some things on the UX we can do with that. But I think because we had the journalistic team, using it and testing it, giving feedback, we were able to actually develop. And then we found a very good we found better data for it as well. We were able to develop a really good product. It's just quite a good example of how you could have gone, yes, we might have put, a lot of money into this, but this is sunk cost. We should write it off and move on. But we kept on going with it, maybe in slightly, kind of bloody-minded way. And I think ultimately we've developed a product that we're now, able to like, particularly with what's going on globally, with this, global trade war, people then are like trying to even more understand what's going on with trade flows and like, look at like, okay, right, the US has put, a tariff on this country. What other suppliers of that product are there of that I could go to? Or, I think it makes it even more, important. I mean, it's very important in seafood anyway, because it's so globally traded. I think yeah, the trade value of seafood, Rabobank puts it at something like $160 billion a year. From memory, I'm sure I've seen this slide at a conference. The global trade value is more than beef, chicken, and pork combined.
It's
So
massive.
yeah, so as a individual, as a category, those dwarf it. And if you look at like the biggest companies, I think there's maybe 100 seafood companies to get to $100 billion of revenue, and maybe like 4 meat companies to get to that same level of revenue. But yeah, the sector is kind of so like global, dispersed, fragmented, and yeah, and all of that lends itself to what we're doing because people are then trying to understand what's going on. It's not as easy as it is maybe in some of the other sectors too, where there's fewer players and it's more consolidated and there's less trade flow.
I'm super curious. Like you said, you founded Undercurrent News 13 years ago. I mean, did you at that time think that you would build like, I would call it like the Bloomberg for seafood data service in that case,
Very,
or is
very
that
telling.
something that it's not? Yeah, but that's the first thing that's struck to my mind. But then, did you think about it then 13 years ago? Is this what did you come to see that okay, I can enhance the content by adding in the data? What was? Did you have like a aha experience on that?
We always aspired to do it. It's just taken it just takes time to develop products. It takes, it's just taking time. And another way to do a business like this would be to, to raise money to start with, but obviously then you're giving away equity. We always had the vision. Like I'd say, what we're doing now is what I really hoped we'd be able to build. It's not like I didn't you know, it's not like we've sort of like kind of pivoted and really gone off. We've really, I think, kept kept a view of what our sort of founding mission was and keep striving towards it. But I think as the product as it is now far exceeds my what I would have thought we could build when we started, particularly around this US wholesale pricing side of things, which we've really pushed in the past 6 months. I didn't envisage that we would ever have had the opportunity to do that, which has come about for various things going on in the sector, and also been able to do it so quickly. And I think the reason we have been able to do that so quickly is because our team has become very good at like this product development process, I think. And I'm not that I don't include myself in that. I mean, I'm the tech team, because we've got the same people, on the dev side that we have been with us for maybe 10 years. So like they understand the product, they understand the process, they understand you know. So yeah, it's cool because I think we just keep we're getting better as a company at doing all this, and yeah, it's fun.
For the listeners who's not very familiar with the seafood industry, is it easy to get your hands on sort of these proprietary databases of seafood prices, trade information? I mean, where do you find this and how do you sort of go about it? Or did you find any challenges in terms of collecting this or discovering, okay, this is what you mentioned, focusing on the US, you have for different species. Like, is it super easy to get your hands on?
No, I mean it's painfully difficult, I would say, which is why I think why we're in a good position in the sector. It's very, very difficult to get the info. Um, there is some public available source of data, like for example like some of the Japanese pricing data we're getting. It's sort of quasi public, but it requires a Japanese speaking seafood expert to access it. For example, or some data we get from China. Again, it's kind of it's sort of there, but you need a Chinese speaking seafood expert to access it. So there's a mixture of stuff where, and then it's going from data which is kind of public, and when then we create value by pulling that data into the site either through APIs, scrapers, and then visualizing that data and then contextualizing it. So there is we're adding value even though the data is kind of there. And for example, the data might be in numerical form, so it's not visualized, it's not charted, there's no historical, you can't see the history on it. But then it's going all the way to like completely proprietary data that we are connecting from our contacts, and that is that's the sort of moat around that, if you will, is pretty deep because it's that's stuff that we're getting from our network. And yeah, so I'd say it's really seafood is a very opaque sector. You really need to know the right people, know the right it's very contact based, very global. So that's how I think we've been able to sort of access both, public, quasi-public, and then, very non-public data sources is by, you know, knowing what to look for and knowing who to speak to get it, through our team.
The last guest I had on the podcast was Tine Karlsen, who's the CEO at Vev, which talked a lot about storytelling, and they have a solution that brings sort of the story to life. But then here you talked about how much the content and the article sort of is driven also by the data. And I almost think about the term here like data-driven storytelling. Could you give an example for the readers in terms of a time where your data platform enabled or enhanced a story that wouldn't have been possible otherwise?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, yeah, one good example would be, when the EU effectively put a tariff on Russian fish at the end of 23, I think it came into play. And then, I was then hearing from sources that what people then were doing was bringing in huge volumes because this tariff was coming into play in January 24. I think it was January 24 from memory. The last few years have been a bit of a blur with all these crazy, COVID, war in Ukraine, now trade war. But I think it was then. So yeah, I heard from sources this is happening. Importers are bringing in huge volumes of product to basically, have that available in the European market before the increased tariff kicks in January. And normally we would then, prior to our kind of data platforms, we would have heard about that from sources. We'd have reported it, and it would have been like sources telling us this. But now we can then visualize. Look here on a trade chart, you can see this. You can see this huge spike in imports in December of this product, and then you can then kind of explain why that is. That's kind of one example. And also the pricing that we're getting, say like farm gate shrimp pricing from India, Ecuador, before we were getting access to this pricing and, doing these, pricing analysis on this, we'd be kind of going out to the market and saying, like asking the Indian, or Ecuadorian processing farmers, what's the price this week? Like trying to, find our way. But it's very hard to do that when you don't, whereas now we know what's happening, and then we can then go to sources and say, I see the price, price of anime in Andhra Pradesh has dropped 10% this week. What's your take on that? And people in the industry,
Just for the listeners as well, Vanamai is a shrimp species. I know that very well, so everybody know Vanamai, and then you have Monodon, which is black tiger shrimp. I know the person on the shrimp, so Vanamai, just for everybody, is shrimp.
Yeah, sorry, I'm probably going a bit too geeky there, but yeah. So I think there are examples of where data allows you to then write a better story and be more credible when you approach sources, and then that allows the journalists to then get more information from people because people in the sector understand that what's going on. You've got a structure of what's going on, and this is where the data is great because you could almost like have the story without speaking. You could write a kind of framework of a story using the data, but going out to speak to people tells the story, gives context, and then takes the story off in different tangents sometimes. So yeah, but it's I'm making it sound like all we do. We have other stuff that isn't data only. We'll still do like speak to a company and find out what their plans for the next couple of years. Interview major kind of industry figures, do trend pieces, analysis, features. We still do all of that. It's just that we've increasingly ramped up this this data driven element.
But you have a great way to sort of understand the whole picture. One thing is the data, but then there's a lot of M&As happening. Rabobank, as you said, have massive investments in this sector, and having also just the people on the ground, what they're thinking. People want to understand the whole picture, and that just doesn't come naturally just by numbers. It's the whole complete part. And I want to move into that because one of the things I love in my job is to work with journalistic team, and then especially you as an editor in chief. Like, how do you decide what stories to cover like each day? What's your sort of process for judging if this topic is newsworthy for your readers? for many of whom are industry executives at these big companies, and it leads them to make decisions for the future.
We're always trying to, in fact, my first editor, the editor of Fishing News International, when I first started, Ian Strutt, he had this mantra of like, make money, save money, make money, save money. That is what all B2B stories should be about. And if it doesn't fulfill that, you shouldn't be bothering to write about it. So I thought that was a really, really kind of, that was a great way to kind of, frame B2B journalism, because if you're not ultimately doing that, like why would your reader be interested in the story? So I'd say that that's still very much the way we see it. And then it's a mixture of kind of as I alluded to earlier, it's a mixture of myself, or we've got an editorial director who joined us from a competitor a few months ago, or the other editors in the US or in Europe or Asia. It's what they think is interesting in their sectors. I'll then also sometimes be signing stuff down, kind of saying I've heard this, I got this tip, passing it on, filtering stuff down. But the editors will be sometimes doing the same with the reporters, and then each person in the team has a sort of different speciality, a different pillar within the sector. So they're almost in charge of like making sure that they're on top of the news in Pangastias, for example, which is a kind of a species farmed in Vietnam. One of the teams hot on covering that. So if there's something going on in that, he'll be covering it. It might be snow crab in Canada, which they catch on the east coast of Canada. We've got a reporter in Newfoundland there, so she's very focused on covering that. A guy on the west coast of the US who's covering Alaska. So each person is kind of responsible for being the expert and kind of owning that area, whether it's geographically or sort of species wise. So that's kind of the way we see it. But I think we have a relatively free, it's not like it's very prescriptive where like, I'm, literally assigning down what everyone needs to do. We've got very good people that understand the industry, and, frankly speaking, a lot of them understand their beats and segment areas far better than I do. So I trust them, to an extent I trust them, that's not to an extent. We let them kind of, follow the stuff that they think is interesting. But then there obviously is times where we do assign and kind of, and it's usually just based on like, the trade war now where, me and the other editors are trying to think of, I guess ways, what are the implications of this? And like, then who's best in the team to sort of go after that angle and follow it up? Or, maybe, like the guy in Japan can cooperate with, the reporter, covers Alaska on a story. Maybe like one of our price reporting team. And this is actually a nice element we've got. We've got 3 price reporters now who are also then integrating their coverage into the editorial team stuff. So, maybe, when we come to cover, like the trade war impacts on lobster, the reporter will be covering it, but then there'll be a price reporter who's giving insights into that. So like to some extent it's about like knowing, letting the team do their thing to some extent, but then also like, directing when necessary and teaming people up when need be, when, 2 or 3 journalists can work together on a story. And that's, I think, sort of where I'll come in and like, decide, maybe these 2 or 3 people could collaborate on something. So that's kind of how it works.
So on this topic, because I love that it's sort of like team oriented. You really built up a team with very specific like knowledge.
Yeah, sort of
in
industry
terms of
experts as well. Yeah, which is great in their own
exactly.
right.
But how do you sort of there's different sort of article formats and how you write the story. So how do you sort of balance the mix between these are quick news updates and these are my deeper analysis for long form pieces? Do you intentionally sort of allocate sometimes resources to bigger feature stories in terms of data analysis, or is it more driven by what's happening in the market at any given time at the moment?
It's a mixture of the two, and certainly at times like this where there's this kind of with the trade war going on, you feel like you're being more kind of reactive, I guess. So yeah, this is the time where we're having to be, I guess, proactive in terms of like how we cover this, but reactive in that this is the story that we need to devote time to. We definitely do go like, okay, right, one of the teams got a long form investigative piece they want to do. We'll then give that person 3 days to work on that, a week to work on that if need be. There's been times where we've given more than that on certain things. If the reporter has got something that we feel that'll like, because yes, it might take weeks to produce even at the top. it's those stories that are really impactful and people kind of remember you by. So it's a mix, but and we don't really have a strict rule around you know the length of a story. Either like we kind of quite free on that. It's not like everything has to be 300 words or everything has to be 2,000 and really in depth. We've got different members of the team have different gravitate towards longer form. Some of them are better with shorter breaking stuff, and we kind of let the team, I guess, do what they feel comfortable with in terms of the story length and the approach. And obviously, we're making sure it's all in line with the house style. I mean, this is an eternal issue for editors is making sure reporters do stuff in a house style. I think that would probably be something which every single editor would kind of complain about. But we do, there's some publications that have a very specific style, like it might be, 300 words. We're not going to do more than that because we think that's what, we'll keep it short if it's a breaking piece. But, we can also go, my view is that, you obviously have the major stuff at the top of the story, but going longer, if someone really wants to go in depth, they can read the full story. But if someone wants just to get the news, they can just read the top. So, yeah, we're quite kind of flexible on that front, I would say, not too prescriptive.
But have you ever encountered? So this is a question I love asking when I'm speaking with editors in chief, just from experience. But have you ever encountered a story idea that made you sort of pause and consider, did this make sense and was it worth pursuing from a business perspective? Maybe, for example, too niche within a niche or potential risky to go out.
Yeah, quite a lot. I mean, definitely more of the former. Like, sometimes, reporters that are in a sort of a regional, like geographically or within their beat might start getting, too niche on something or too, too tangential from the sector, and you have to, bring them back and kind of say, look, just be kind of upfront about it, like to say like we don't want, we're not interested in that. Like, can you, divert your attentions on this? So that definitely happens 100%. We're quite, it doesn't happen that much because I feel like our team do really know what they're doing. So it's not like someone's saying, let's write a story about, I don't know, like Apple pricing or something. They know that we need to keep it on fish, and keep it on the stuff that kind of moves the market. But the risky side, I think we've been one of the things we kind of set out when we started the business was this, the tagline was seafood news from under the surface. And we were really we sort of set ourselves apart by, doing kind of risky, like not being afraid to, to dig deeper. And, we wrote actually during, just after Russia invaded Ukraine, obviously, and all the Russian oligarchs were being sanctioned. We found out the Russian oligarch was actually ultimately the money behind some seafood companies in the US. And we really investigated into that. And I spent weeks working on this piece on it pretty much exclusively. And we were getting like threats from their comms team and all this, and so we don't shy away from doing that. We've had our fair share of legal threats and stuff, as you'd expect from that. And then also the M&A stuff as well. I mean, I maybe should have. One thing we started the business around is kind of proprietary forward-looking M&A stories. So like trying to basically like instead of waiting for the press release to come out when a company's been acquired, you find out when the sale process is starting, you find out which investment bank is running the process, you report, the start of the process, you report, who's interested in the first round, who's in the first round bids, taking a kind of approach from say like Merger Market or something like that, and applying that. So yeah, we always go deep, and don't shy away from doing tough stories that that frankly speaking piss people off, because if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job as a journalist.
Never change on that. Keep on with that mentality. That's what gets journalism going, and I completely agree. And one thing that sort of once you talked, I really like sort of how you work in terms of your teams and the different industry knowledge that you have, but it's a global industry and you have a global team as well, different continents, different time zones. How do you manage and coordinate sort of the team of journalists around the world? Have you made any learnings of keeping communication smooth and the quality consistent across such a global operation?
It's definitely a challenge, and things have got even more challenging, I'd say, in the past year because we've added more journalists. Um, yeah, we've got maybe 15 in total now across the world. So it's a lot to marshal, but we use Slack as a that's kind of Slack and WhatsApp are the two communication tools that the team are most using, mainly Slack. So we're making sure that everyone's kind of checking in with what they're doing, making sure people aren't bumping into each other, working on the same thing, and then yeah, like we also use Grammarly as in terms of like tech products as a way to like if you've got the whole team using Grammarly, that's at least kind of a way that you can get copy to a certain level of consistency for the editors to then, and then obviously then, the editing team will, and we do sort of, everyone, there's no like dedicated editor. All the editors are also reporters. So they're kind of, player coaches, as the Americans would say. So, reporting as well as editing. But it's the most challenging part of running a small global business. But I think, we're pretty good at it overall. Everybody, everyone, the key is to over communicate basically, it's kind of like, to just be very clear, right? Whenever you're working remotely, right? I'm nipping out to go to a doctor's appointment. I'm going for my lunch. I'm doing, so like everyone knows when people are coming and going. So there isn't a time when, big story breaks, someone's not there, the other person thinks they're there, doesn't do it. I think over communicating, and then we have a core of the team that do work together in London. There's a group of the team that work together in London, and then there's a group that works that live close to each other in New Jersey. So they kind of work together a bit more. But yeah, a lot of the team are working working from home, which you just have to be careful of stopping people getting into their silos and kind of getting the kind of not feeling motivated because they're not part of the team. But frankly speaking, with journalism, it's such a busy job. Like you don't really almost have time for that. So I think that's kind of a good thing about it. And everyone is communicating on Slack with what they're doing, giving tips to each other, sharing contacts, sharing leads. So yeah, I think we do it reasonably well. That I would say, the kind of global communication. There's always times when it kind of it slips up, but on the whole, I think we're pretty good at it because there are the great tools out there now to help you with it.
Over communication is absolutely a great way to go about it, but it gets me curious on another question on this, because you started the conversation, Tom, saying that you worked sort of in B2B, but getting into the seafood industry sort of was not the way, but you got into that. And that was sort of like, how is sort of your hiring process? What do you look for when you hire people to work on like the journalists? I mean, you talked about your team being like very domain expertise and knowledge within that. Like, what's the mix between expertise versus raw journalism talent that you were? You came from journalism and then you worked you into like, how would you look in terms of the right hiring for your news?
I think one thing I've definitely noticed with hiring is that the kind of the gut feelings that you have after 3 interviews with a hire, they will play out more often than not. So if you have a kind of a misgiving about a potential hire, more often than not, that's going to play out, is what I've noted. It's just you have to, the upsides of that hire have to be worth it. So, like you might have a feeling with someone like maybe they're going to, they're not going to go as hard at this as I would want them to. But on the other hand, they're really smart and they've got this kind of, maybe they speak a certain language that unlocks a certain area, or there's always like ups and downs with people, and the upsides obviously have to outweigh the downsides. We're in a much better position now as a business because we're more established. We've been going for longer. When we started, we weren't able to pay competitive, particularly salaries to get like say we wanted to go I want to hire a top pricing journalist. Like that would have probably been the budget of our like our our whole turnover in in year 2 of the business to do that. So we couldn't. So we had to kind of bring in. I did two of our team, two of our current team in the UK did the same journalism course as me in Cardiff. They both came in as interns. One of them came in as an intern in my previous employer, and then I ended up hiring him when we started Undercurrent. One of them came as an intern for Undercurrent. So we took, yeah, like you said, we took someone that has very good journalism training, and we kind of educated them in the seafood sector. And with some people, they clicks and they get into it. Some people don't. So there's definitely that element to our hiring where we've brought in people, upskilled them, increased their industry knowledge. People travel the world, which some people love. If that appeals to you, this is the type of job for you. Then on the other hand, in more recent years, we've been able to hire journalists with much more experience, and also journalists with seafood experience. So like we've just been able to bring in the US, the editors of two publications in the US have joined us. So they basically had maybe even like 8 to 10 years of seafood reporting experience before that. The journalists we hired in Canada, the two journalists we've got in Canada, both had a lot of experience before they joined us as well. So yeah, I think it's much more, and the same with the team in Asia. The guy we've got in China and the guy we've got in Japan, they both were very, very industry experts before they joined us, worked for other publications. So I think if someone's going to be successfully like work remotely for you, like in a niche, they need to. It's tricky if they don't know the sector. We have done that in the US. Earlier on, we started. We hired a first US reporter in 2013. My co-founder actually relocated to Seattle in maybe 2016, 17, something like that. So that was helpful because she was there. So we then had a small, like hub in Seattle. We had an office there. We had three at one point, two journalists based there working with her. So that was easier because she was able to work with them and help them. But definitely it's a challenge, I think, with people working remotely. If they don't know the sector, it can be quite difficult for them to get going. So it really helps if you like we have now, got the capacity to hire really good people that come in with experience, of the industry as well as journalism.
What you said there resonated quite heavily with me because as I said, I was in the seafood industry as well, in between sort of working in the news industry, and I knew some things about farmed salmon, but I was then working for a company predicting sort of production volumes, the trade in terms of shrimp. And I had to learn what the different species, Vanamai, Monodon, the Argentinian red shrimp. I had to learn what the HLSO, headless shell on, meant. But one thing that is actually, the industry is so interesting and you almost get hooked on it immediately. And it's such an interesting thing, as I believe, coming from journalism and into it. It's also very people are very open to sort of share in there, and I can only say that it's an amazing space. And there's times I do miss it. Tom, you said you started the Undercurrent News 13 years ago. Looking back on your journey with Undercurrent News, what are some of the key learnings or maybe surprises you encounter in building a niche media company from scratch? So, and do you have any principle you swear by now that you didn't really realize when you started?
I'm not sure how my brain thinks to kind of respond to a question like this. I think the key, if it's a learning, I'm not sure. It's just, I think anyone, obviously, you can't, there are obviously some business concepts that you can't make successful, but I think you can make, if you've got a solid business idea, you can make it successful if you're willing to work hard enough. Just most people are not willing to work hard enough to make their own business a success. And we were lucky in the sense my co-founder and I, just crazy hardworking people. I'd be up at 2 a.m. to break a story on something that's going on in New Zealand, or she'd be like working all night on coding to build it's a learning. It's just you need to just I think some people maybe think it's be nice to have their own business and work for themselves and not that it is, but you're never ultimately going to make that successful ultimately unless you're prepared, unless it isn't nice. Because frankly speaking, it's not always nice having your own business. It's lonely. It's kind of it's intense. It's it's stressful. There's high risk attached to it. but you just have to every day. You just like go hard. Be willing to be in the office at 5:30 in the morning if need be. Work till 2 in the morning if need be. You have to just sort of run through walls basically to build the business. That's kind of, I don't know whether that's even a learning, but that's kind of and I try and approach the business now in that way as much as I can. There's obviously limits to it. I've got 2 young kids. It's kind of not as not easy as it was in that sense, and maybe that isn't either. That's not sustainable in the long term either. You need, you can't maybe work like, you have to in those first few years of a business. But that's, I think, one of the things that's made the business successful is that, me and Eva, the co-founder, worked so hard, and we still do. Well, she's not in the business, but I still do. And then that filters down to the team. Then the team realize there's a lot at stake. They realize this is you set the tone from the top, and I wouldn't say that I'm the greatest manager in the world, or there's all these I'm definitely I'm too passionate, too volatile, too close to it. But on the other hand, all these things have made the business what it is as well. So yeah, and sometimes I think it's easy to beat yourself up around the shortcomings you might have as a founder, entrepreneur, driver personality. But you have to also remember these same things are what made the business successful in the first place. Because you need that. You can't have you can't have you're not going to have a successful business if everybody's like, right, get into the office at 9, I leave at 5. That's just not going to work. It's gonna fail, and that is why so many startups do fail. Is that people think it's nice to do, it's great, it's have start their own business, but they maybe don't believe it's going to succeed, and maybe don't have the kind of the drive to push on and make it a success.
I'm thinking of like the right word, and I think the word that comes into my is grit. Having grit over
Grit and
time.
intensity, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely it. And would you have done anything different if you could go back?
No, I mean, I guess small stuff, but not anything. There's not been anything where we've kind of gone, that was a complete waste of time, or that I've definitely, I think some things that I have done that I would go, if I could go back, and definitely, like, I've tried to make the wrong hire work, and this is, I'm sure, a very very common thing that you must hear from founders. You try and because I'm a decent person. You don't. It's not great to to say to someone this isn't working, but sometimes yeah, with you make the wrong hire in the first place, and then you try and make that hire work because, like, in your mind you're like, I can make this work. I can make this it should work, but often you can't. And I think, yeah, one thing that I wish that in both my co-founder and I probably been too nice with this stuff. We should have cut some things off earlier when it felt like it wasn't the right hire, and move on, because you then realize you wasted that time, maybe 6 months, 8 months, a year, trying to make something work, but it was never going to work because the person wasn't the right person for the role. That's one of the key things. And I've heard, I listen to lots of podcasts about founders, and you hear that a lot. And some people, I think, are very good at that because they're just much more black or white with this. But it's a tough thing to do. And I think, in retrospect, I wished I'd been tougher on that front. But then, that's not something that I knew anything about before I started the business. So a lot of this stuff, you could go, I wish I'd done this differently, but you didn't know, going through the kind of, learning from your mistakes. You have to make the mistake to learn, don't you? Yeah, but there's not any kind of fundamental things where, I feel like we made a major misstep with something, and I really wish I'd done it differently. If this trade portal development had not worked out, that would have definitely been one where, we kind of should have cut that off, but we managed to get that going. There have been other things with other products where we probably should have kind of let it go earlier, but nothing too significant, I wouldn't say. And that's not to say that we make the right decisions all the time. It's just, I think that we're pretty focused on what our mission is, and we've sort of stuck to that. Yeah,
I like the saying that it's never a failure; it's only a learning. and
Exactly.
you move and you learn from it. And I I just find it fantastic having this conversation with you, Tom, and I really, really admire the work that Undercurrent News is doing. And I think one of the things here with the trade portal, the pricing, and so big building something more into the content that gives value to your readers and so on, even going into learning from it, you see there also done it. You done something that's quite, I think, unique in terms of B2B, building something more than just the content. I see this as a trend, so I really, really appreciate you sharing the news there. We have a closing tradition in this podcast that the previous guest gets to leave one for the next guest. The previous guest I had was Tine Carlson in Web, who's the CEO there that builds, it's a experience builder that really brings stories to life. And her question is related to the workforce in use. How, in your view, what skills or mindset do you believe the next generation of journalists will need to have in order to thrive? For example, now with AI coming in, technology changing, there's a lot of journalists now being let go from news publishers. What does the next workforce look like in the future that we have with AI, tech, and things are changing?
I think it's I think obviously it's going to be very, very disruptive for the media landscape. That's stating the obvious, but I see it as a big, like opportunity for journalists now. But you have to be using it and understand, how to use it. So that's what I'm trying to get our team to do, to start using it. Not integrating into the work stream to some extent, but yeah, just understanding, where you can, add value with it, the stuff that you can use, basically take like the mundane elements of the job, away. I think, but what it really emphasizes is the need to focus on the core journalistic skills, which is providing proprietary information on whatever sector you're writing about, um, building a network so that that you're able to get that information from your sources, because this and then it's like you're protecting yourself from being like like put out work by AI, because it's not something. AI will very, very quickly be able to take a company's quarterly earnings report, turn that into a perfect story, take some trade data probably and turn that into a story, or take a press release and summarize that into AI will be able to do all of that, and can to some extent do it now anyway, to be honest. I mean, it's amazing what it can do with that type of thing, but it can't go to a conference, network, meet sources, get scoops that way. So that's, I think, the it basically creates, and it does put at risk publications where it's heavily reliant on press releases. Well, to be honest, it doesn't put the publication at risk. It in fact it allows the publication to hugely lower its costs, because it just won't need as many actual journalists to produce the same publication. For example, when I first started in 2005, a lot of the publications that Informa had in this maritime and transport division were heavily reliant on press releases. Like, a lot of the publication would have just been filled by press releases, journalists editing those press releases, doing, whereas, now they wouldn't need a journalist to edit a lot of those press releases. Would just get done by AI. But, the journalists need to focus on adding value. I think that's kind of, the big thing that, and I still think it's obviously going to result in big changes in the sector. But, if you're really good at what you do, you've got a great network, it's not going to, heavily impact you, I don't think, because, it cannot, like what we're doing is we're selling proprietary information to our audience. You know, AI can't do that, because it cannot, go to events, speak to contacts, and contextualize it. So I think it just really, like, it makes those basic journalistic skills of actually going out and getting stuff even more important. You cannot just rely on incoming stuff as a journalist now, with the way things are going.
It's a great advice. Tom, you get to leave a question for the next guest. It's definitely somebody in the industry, in journalism, tech towards it. What are you curious about asking the next guest?
Oh, I've got to have a think about that. Yeah, I guess I would like to kind of take on that AI question. Um, and maybe ask which segments of the media does the next guest think will be most open to disruption from AI, and which sector of the media will most benefit from it, and in what way will that be? And will that be a benefit to the owners of the companies or to the journalists or a bit of both? Something like that.
I love that. I love that. It's a really, really relevant question in this. Tom, I really, really appreciate your time and for being so open, sharing your story with me, the listeners. So I really, really appreciate it. So I have to thank you for doing this.
Thanks, Niels. Thanks for asking me to do it. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.